Listen to AM 560 The Answer online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, on your Alexa-powered smart speaker, and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. 52 shot, 10 dead this weekend in Chicago. Basically the same numbers as Memorial Day. That made international news. But, you know, it'll stop making international news when it's just customary as it is in Chicago.
Yeah, because Chicagoans are so used to it.
52, 10, and 10. What's the other 10? We have our 10th individual accused of shooting, killing, or trying to shoot or kill someone in Chicago while awaiting trial for a felony. An 18-year-old Chicago man with a pending gun case shot his younger brother in the chest because he was, quote, unquote, tired of his brother.
Oh, my God.
His 16-year-old brother survived. So now this 18-year-old becomes the 10th person this year. We had 6 dozen last year, about the same the year before, representing dozens of dead and hundreds of wounded that could have easily been prevented if you kept somebody awaiting trial on felony charges to be removed from society pending trial. But we don't want to do that.
Nope, we just want to hand out electronic monitoring. And don't forget that they get 48 hours off, 5 days in, then they can do whatever they want.
And so far this year, with number 10 being this 18-year-old, that's 13 victims, 6 dead. All preventable. By the way, the what is going on here in terms of the mentality, if an 18-year-old shooting a 16-year-old brother because he's tired of him is not jarring enough.
It's so sad.
I'm tired of you, he told his brother before shooting him in the chest and arm. He then told his younger brother not to tell anyone about the shooting.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Yeah, I'm going to hide it from Mom.
And then he tried to cover his brother's wounds with a blanket when police arrived. This is a mentality you're dealing with, and you think that is going to be addressed by BLM Brandon's Make Work Jobs program?
That's a Kim Fox move right there, letting him out.
I mentioned this earlier in the show. We played a little bit of Stephen A. Smith from last week. Stephen A. Smith, the loudmouth from ESPN, who took the occasion of his podcast last week after the violence across the country, most notably in Chicago, which is usually the case, but big blue city violence, which is mainly what it is, even though Stephen A. Smith tried to middle the issue like a good member of the D.C. press corps, which is what the sports press corps is, just the minor leagues for the political press corps. And he said, what are we going to do here? Where's the noise? Where's the media attention on black crime? He didn't go very far, but he went down that road. It's not a road that has not been traveled before by black celebrities, but he traveled it, talking about blacks killing blacks, saying this.
Nothing else matters if we're dead. Nothing else matters if we're killing each other. Forget about what we deserve. Some people have different forms of reparations. They want money from the government, even though the government's national debt is at $31.4 trillion as of last month. I hear you, though. Because, damn it, if we come up with money to give to Ukraine, which I'm not opposed to, and we come up with money to take care of immigrants coming into our borders, and we come up with money every time we feel the need to address one issue or another that happens in this country, we damn sure could come up with money for our minority populace that contributed to the upliftment of this country that was marginalized and demonized and ostracized and oppressed for years. So nobody's trying to sit up there and say that we don't deserve something. My point is, it's debatable as to what that could be. It could be making sure the economy flourishes and that there's job opportunities. It could be by contributing to education and enabling folks that otherwise couldn't afford an education to make sure they get educated so we can uplift our society. There's a variety of ways that reparations could take place. But it doesn't matter if we're dead. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So he's, the door is slightly ajar in Stephen A. Smith's mind. A little light is getting in, not nearly enough. The feeling the need to get off on the tangent of reparations. Sort of the same thing you heard at the city council, Chicago City Council last week with the, oh, sure, $50 million for migrant housing, but what about our reparations? The cut me in or cut it out mentality.
Right.
That is a signature of every kleptocracy, including the one in Chicago. What is the 18-year-old black man, 18, who shot his brother because he was tired of him? What does he deserve? What has he contributed? Questions that Stephen A. and others don't want to confront because we're really not interested. And to his point, at least, like I said, a little bit of light is shining in. He made the point that where's the media coverage of stories like that 18-year-old covering shooting the 16-year-old? Where's the coverage of that? Well, you know where it is. Black on black crime is not something that we cover. So is the case in New York City. Of course it is. Why would it be any different? Regional outpost of the D.C. Press Corps. Everybody is doing their job in furtherance of their political party. For more on that, I'm pleased to be joined by Hannah Meyers. She's a fellow and director of policing and public safety at the Manhattan Institute, same organization that features our friend Rafael Mangual and others, Heather McDonald. Hannah Meyers, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This is such an important topic, and certainly for you there in Chicago, as well as for us here in New York City and in so many other cities where there are so many of these horrible incidents like you were just describing with those two kids, and nobody cares and nobody talks about it because, it's not fitting the narrative. And what I really argue in this Wall Street Journal op-ed last week is that justice and fairness, and really fairness, demand that we look at each crime by the particulars of that incident. Who was involved? What were the circumstances? What was the threat? What were the perceptions? What did the witnesses see? It's so unique and nuanced. But there has been this huge push in the last few years that has been very successful to look at each crime not by those individual particulars, but by the group identities of the people involved, in particular race, and also socioeconomic status, but particularly race, and try to just look at, well, what does it mean for the system and for society? Nothing about what was right or wrong about the people involved. And it's incredibly unfair. And so I look at these two chokehold tragedies that happened in New York City in the last few months that really highlight in the response to them how in the real world, if we're just looking at the group identities of those involved, it is incredibly unfair to the people involved. The one incident, which was international news, and I'm sure covered in Chicago as well, where a white ex-Marine killed a black man in the subway who was acting erratically and violently, and put him in a short chokehold, assisted by others, got assistance at the next station, but he died tragically. And the response has been clamoring from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, from the head of our New York City Council, Adrienne Adams, from every quarter, that he's a murderer and the outcome has to be that he's immediately arrested and go to jail. And it shows that the system is racist and that just because he was homeless and poor and a drug addict, that nobody cares and he was murdered. And protesters jumped into the subway, onto the subway tracks here in the city to block trains. And meanwhile, there was another chokehold case that happened in January where a black repeat violent offender put his 15-year-old stepson, black kid, into a chokehold after an argument. The son had been bullied at school, no history of being violent. It was in their own home. And, the stepfather had been multiple prison stints. He shot someone in the back 3 times of his victim while he was fleeing. He had gotten in trouble in jail for being violent. He was in family court for anger management and for unrelated family issues of being violent to his own family. And no one has heard of this case, and nobody cares. And the chokehold was longer, and he didn't get assistance until the poor kid's mom, begged him to call for help because the kid was unresponsive. It was months and months until he was arrested and arraigned. And then the judge released him on his own recognizance, even though his own criminal, defense attorney said he should be held in on bail. He was released on his own recognizance. It was egregious. Governor Hochul insisted that the state parole board revoke his parole. But even there, it's such a long process. He was back out with GPS monitoring, like you were saying.
He was charged with was he charged with first degree murder?
No, of course not.
He was charged with manslaughter?
Manslaughter, and also another homicide related charge, but not murder.
So a convicted felon who did stints, just released from state prison, who had previous convictions for felony robbery and assault, including, as you mentioned, shooting a fleeing victim 3 times in the back, was disciplined for violent conduct while incarcerated, commits an alleged act of manslaughter, and he's given a walk.
A total walk. A total walk.
Yeah, right.
And no one has heard of it.
I know. I never heard about this story before.
Okay. I remember Hochul intervening, but I mean, honestly, what do you do in a city like that, other than or Chicago, other than leave if and when you can?
Well, we love our cities. We don't want people. What we want is for everyone to look at cases like this and to look at the specifics of these cases and say, is this fair? Do I think that this is fair?
I mean, oh boy. I mean, this is you should mention the subway thing too. I mean, we talked about this. We actually talked about this with Peachy Keenan, who used to have to ride the New York City subway, much to her chagrin. So Jordan Neely and Daniel Penny, that's international cause celeb, and all the race hustlers are there at the funeral, starting with Al Sharpton, and then Simon Marshall. Simon Marshall, another failure of the system. He pushed a 40-year-old woman, Michelle Go, onto the tracks in front of an upcoming train, murdered her, and nobody's heard of that either. Or if they did, I vaguely remember it being reported in the Post or something, and then we move on to the next day's, RIP list, which is what we do in Chicago.
What's so horrible is that it's so many of these really extreme criminal justice reforms that go beyond what we know will have negative consequences, go beyond what is a reasonable reform that we can all say, okay, this seems like it will make the system more fair without also harming people and harming public safety. Or the reason there are so many mentally unstable people now on the subways, and I ride the subway all the time, lifelong New Yorker, you really see the difference, is because for the slew of criminal justice reforms. We have bail reform here, like you do there, where you can't hold someone in because they're dangerous. So not only in the short term between the time of arrest and when their case is adjudicated, not only are they out on the street, but you're taking away what used to be this incredibly valuable time for that person to be observed for mental illness and treated, or because mental illness and drug abuse are so often coexistent, for them to get either to dry out, to get help. That incredibly important opportunity where this is a system where you actually are able to identify who is a violent, unstable person who needs treatment and detain them. We just abdicated that whole possibility, and we have discovery reform here in New York, which so increases the compliance burden on prosecutors that they can only bring many fewer cases, especially lower level cases.
It just sounds like Chicago.
If you're taking the subway,
honestly,
if you're taking the subway, I hope you're sitting next to Bernie Getz when you go to and from.
Well, let me ask you this, because Reverend Sharpton said, there's 2 other people that were helping.
Not a reverend.
Daniel Perry, when he murdered this Neely guy. Whatever happened to them? Because he wants them arrested as well.
Right now the grand jury here in Manhattan is reviewing all the evidence. Obviously, we don't know all of the evidence because we're not the grand jury. That's why the justice system exists. They will, they'll testify. We don't know if there's other footage from the train that shows what happened before, but that will all come forward. All the details and particulars will come forward, and the grand jury will decide whether they want to indict Penny, and I guess, and if they think someone else should be charged or not on the evidence of the case. I mean, we just on the outside don't know, but certainly there is a lot to suggest that from the footage that the public sees, that the three guys, Penny being the main one, who held Neely, didn't seem to think they were killing him.
Well,
really.
Okay. Let's just skip ahead. There's no way you charge in this case if but for an Alvin Bragg or a prosecutor like him. It's a ridiculous case. There is zero chance that he gains a conviction on that in any sort of sane world. But New York, like Chicago, is not a sane place, so who knows? But the real question is the Penny Neely case. Is it shaking people up? Are you seeing people start to change their minds? Is there an awakening happening? This chokehold case that you documented in your piece in the Journal. Are you getting any feedback? Like, are scales falling from eyes? Are synapses firing? Because if not, then what are we talking about?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. I do think because riding the subway is such a universal, at least for most people and people who can't afford to just Uber everywhere, for people in New York. And I think, I know for a fact that if you've been riding the subway for the last 2-3 years, you've felt unsafe and changed cars often. In fact, actually over the weekend, I was taking my 3 little kids to Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, and there was this guy slumped out with like a gash all over his leg. Just, my kids were asking me, is Dad okay? I mean, it's horrible. That shouldn't be, and you're making those like judgments. Okay, I think he's just going to sit there and I can still sit like across the aisle from him. I mean, it's a reality. And everybody understands what it feels like to be afraid in those instances. And also everyone understands this is a public space. I deserve to feel safe here. Right. I deserve to feel safe with my kids here. I deserve to not switch cars. And so I think that it's more and more not jiving with people's reality of what they're experiencing. And also, like I say, I mean, I really think it's this like dichotomy between this idea of systemic justice and these things that we think about in these big system terms versus fairness, which I think is a very individual experience. We all have a sense, like kids have a sense of what's fair or not fair. And I think it's elemental to society and to looking out for ourselves and each other. And I think increasingly, this is not fair. If this is what we're going for, if this is, progressive, criminal justice, and no, this is not fair.
Well,
and I think,
yeah. I hope you're right, but I fear you're not. But good luck in New York, and keep documenting this along with your colleagues at the Manhattan Institute. She is Hannah Meyers, Fellow and Director of Policing and Public Safety at the Manhattan Institute. Hannah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
You have probably heard from a young age that you need to eat your fruits and vegetables. But there are so many different ones. And not only that, the cost continues to grow the more and more fruits and vegetables you put in your shopping basket. Help keep it simple and get a variety of fruits and vegetables with Balance of Nature's fruits and veggie capsules. You get the benefit of 31 whole fruits and vegetables by taking a few capsules of Balance of Nature's fruits and veggies. Not to mention, it comes straight to your door. Start your journey to